Hello everyone and welcome back to Wordfence Live. So you've worked hard on your WordPress sites and your content. Now it's time to get some site visitors. Ensuring that your site ranks well in the Google search engine results pages is a lot more nowadays than just keywords. Coming up soon in August 2021, Google will use Core Web Vitals as a ranking factor for sites. Is your site ready? We're going to get you up to speed with everything you need to know in just a moment. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Wordfence Live. My name is Scott Miller. I'm a support engineer here at Wordfence. Today, we're looking at Core Web Vitals and performance monitoring. Those two words, performance monitoring, you've likely heard those before here on Wordfence Live. Our website performance measuring tool, Fast or Slow, has recently received an update that adds a number of factors important to your site's performance. Depending on how familiar you are with Fast or Slow, you may know that these performance metrics that we offer are measured from around the world and not just in a single location. Your site might be performing well from one location, but much worse from another. And that's great to know. And you can find that out by using our free service, Fast or Slow. In today's global economy, performance everywhere around the world is going to be critical to your site's success. In addition to new tools and metrics, Fast or Slow now does uptime monitoring as well. Today, we're going to give you a look at that and get you familiar with how the uptime monitoring works. If you haven't already, head over to fastorslow.com, enter your site's URL. Let us know what you're seeing there for your scores. Of course, it might all look overwhelming at first. Maybe your score is lower than what you want to see there, but there's a lot of good documentation on the site there. It's going to let you know which metrics are important, which mean more than others, how the metrics are scored, and more. So go ahead over, take a look. You can click on the little information buttons and get a good idea of what everything on the site means. As I mentioned, Fast or Slow continues to be a free service offered for the good of the community. So everything that you see us doing here today with Fast or Slow and talking about with regards to Fast or Slow today is free to use. You're also going to want to stick around to the end of the show when we're going to give you some insights on how Fast or Slow can make improving your site's core web vitals easier than any other tool. And that's what it's all about today. We're going to be talking about these core web vitals and the importance of the changes coming up soon. One last thing, remember to hit the like button below the video here. You can hit the subscribe and bell buttons as well to be notified when we go live. That's every Tuesday, noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. Let's get started by bringing in our threat analyst, Ram Gall, and our director of marketing, Kathy Zant. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
How you doing?
I just wanted to say I appreciate bring us up to speed with website performance. I see what you did there, and yeah.
You know, it's the little things whenever I can, chime in here and there. Kathy, how's it going over there? It's been a little while, I think, since we've had you on live. Too long, really.
Yeah, but I had to reset up everything, so that was a load of fun this morning. But it's good to be back.
I do that on Tuesday mornings when I'm getting all ready to go. Ram, what's up over there? I'm guessing it's probably slightly hot, right?
It's slightly. It's actually going to be 108 today, I guess, which is cooler than it's been in a while. And I guess tomorrow we might even get some rain or something. So it'll only be 99. Yeah,
Wow.
That'll be different, huh?
It will.
Okay, let's dive in. We got a swag question. I'm sure you're ready for the link. Keep an eye out for that in the chat. Please answer in the form. And if you're one of the first 5, you will win the swag. From how many locations does Fast or Slow currently measure your website's performance? And for any of you who are new here who have not checked out Fast or Slow yet, head on over because there is a lot that we're offering over there. And we've said it a few times already. This is completely free, like a lot of the other stuff that we talk about with Central and Teams that we've just added to that, the Wordfence plugin in general. How many percent of the plugin is free, Kathy? 95% of the plugin is just there.
There's a lot of free stuff in the plugin. It's pretty cool. I mean, the premium benefits obviously are pretty strong and compelling, but we do offer a lot for free just because, keeping the
good of the
WordPress
community
community safe.
Yep.
That's it. That's what it's all about.
Okay, so while everybody is over there answering the swag question, Kathy, maybe kick us off. Why do we need to be measuring our site's availability? We talked about uptime monitoring with fast or slow, which we've added, and performance as well. What does all mean? It's a lot about the customers, right?
It really, well, yeah, you're in business for a reason, and that reason is your customers. That reason is your site visitors. It is whoever your target market is. You have some objectives there, whether it's to sell product or provide a service, provide information, but you have a reason for being online, and it's to connect with an audience. And it's important to understand where your customers are, and what are their expectations of your site, not only with all of the content that you're investing in creating, but also in what they're expecting in terms of site availability and site performance. We'll assume you've got all of the content part figured out, and we're going to talk today about measuring the effectiveness of your website in terms of its availability to those target audiences that you're trying to address, and the performance, how that experience of visiting your site is, what is your audience experiencing when they visit your site? Is your audience on the other side of the world? Is there an issue with your hosting provider being able to provide a good experience to an audience? Like if your site is hosted in Australia, but your audience is worldwide, and someone in New York is visiting your site, and it's not necessarily a good experience for them because of, the long distance relationship that your site has with your audience. You need to understand who your customers are, where they're coming from, and what their expectation is. Now, in the old days when we had to shop, actually going into storefronts, and you needed something from a particular store, and you get there at 5:10 and it just closed 10 minutes ago, and you kind of make a mental note that you're going to come back. But in today's age, I was sitting with my almost 13-year-old daughter the other day, and she's really into horses, and she was on this website looking for saddle pads, because apparently saddle pads are like the thing to collect for young girls who are really into horses. And so she went to this site, and she was looking at saddle pads, and the site wasn't responding. It actually gave her 404 on the homepage and said service unavailable. And so she's asking about, what 404 means and everything, educational experience. But her expectation was that, the site doesn't work, and she went to a different site to look for saddle pads.
I suspect that's the last time she'll ever visit that site, potentially, as well.
That day, yesterday, it was the last time she visited that site. She went to a different site to look at saddle pads. So for yesterday, she forgot about that site, and she started getting her needs met to look at saddle pads from a competitor. And that's the last thing you want, is to have that visibility for your audience, your target audience, to have a negative experience. It ends up affecting your brand, affects your relationship with your target market. But it also affects you, in terms of how, for Google, obviously search engine ranking is incredibly important to anybody who's doing business online. And for Google, they want the sites that they're sending their audience, their search customers to, they want the results to be a positive experience too, across the board. Because if you are not finding what you need and you want from your audience, or from your search results, your audience is going to go elsewhere. Maybe they'll use Bing. Maybe they'll use DuckDuckGo. Maybe they'll use a different search engine. Even though everybody's turned Google into a verb, there are competitive search engines out there. And being able to make sure that the customer's experience across the board for Google is incredibly important. So if your site is unavailable, if somebody can't get to the site from search, and they detect that your site is down, it's going to start disappearing from the search engine. So it's incredibly important to your brand, your search engine performance, and your customer relationships. Website outages can also be incredibly expensive if you are if you're doing commerce online. You want to make sure that your site is available all the time. Ram, there's a number of different things that can cause a site to be unavailable. What are some of the things that we know about?
Well, the first thing that maybe comes to everyone's, mind is denial of service attacks. And these might be malicious, but, at the same time, legitimate traffic spikes can also cause your site to get super slow or go down. I might be showing my age right by saying this, but we used to call it getting slash dotted when, a site would suddenly go viral and all of a sudden everyone visited all at once, which is a very good thing if your site can handle it, because suddenly you're the hottest new site. But if your site can't handle it, then you're going to disappoint a lot of people who might have otherwise become customers. But, there's also things like, intentional. You can do maintenance, and it's also a good idea to keep track of, when most of your visits and sales are, so that you know when the best time to do maintenance is. But, there's also things like malware that can take down your site or otherwise impair its ability to load quickly. Some malware will run in your visitors' browsers as JavaScript, and, if you suddenly see your site taking much longer to load on the JavaScript rendering side of thing, that might be a sign that there's more JavaScript on your site that you didn't add on purpose. And then there's some basic things like, just not provisioning your site's hardware or server to meet the demand of the amount of traffic you're expecting. And then there's rarer things like, issues with data center or issues with a CDN. Most of the time using a CDN will help you avoid this kind of thing. But, that Fastly thing that happened a couple weeks ago, if a CDN goes down, it can take down huge swaths of the internet. But I consider those black swan events, as one would call them. I wouldn't really expect those particular issues. Most of what we're going to see is basically going to boil down to poor design or coding issues. But there is good news, and that good news is that you can use Fast or Slow for uptime monitoring. So I'm going to show you all how to do that, if you will give me a minute.
And that's new, isn't it? We just added that?
Yes, this is new, and this is free, which is kind of just wow. Free uptime monitoring, that wasn't really a thing for most of the time I've been in tech. Uptime monitoring is traditionally pretty expensive, so wow. Anyways, you do have to register an account for this, so we're not going to sell your data or anything.
Yeah, easy to set up, easy to use. It comes to your email. The list that Ram just brought up, Adam mentioned, of course, Wordfence is going to help with malware if you're seeing that issue with your website being unavailable. But with traffic spikes and attacks and things like that, you can use Wordfence and some of our features to baseline and get a good idea of what is normal for your site. Chloe talked about that a few weeks ago, and she had an excellent segment on live. So if you missed that, check it out.
And we do verify your email address, which doesn't sound like it's that big of a deal, but it's actually a pretty important security thing, just so that, people can't sign up as you or sign up for you. But anyways, once you've signed up for an account on fasterslow.com, you can create an uptime monitor. And, you can either do that from the dashboard or by clicking uptime.
George is equally excited as us that the uptime monitoring is free, and asks who can they thank for that. I think one group of people would be our premium users who make all of this possible.
Why, yes, our premium
features.
users are, thank you. It is thanks to users like you that we can do all this cool stuff. So I'm going to monitor my website, which, by the way, it's pretty terrible. I mostly use it to host proof of concept that stuff in case I want to hack stuff that requires a remote file. So I am going to create a monitor. URL is ramgal.com. And here's the cool thing. Most sites, you're going to expect them to return a 200 status code. But, there might be exceptions. You might expect your site to return the I'm a little teapot status code. No, probably not. But, maybe your site has a temporary redirect and you want to make sure that that's still in place. So that'd be a 302. You can set the timeout. It defaults to 5 seconds because most of the time, if your site doesn't at least begin to get back to a request by then, something is very, very wrong. But you can set it lower if you're expecting a very performance site and you want to know if your performance has degraded. You can set it higher if you are expecting your site to be really slow. I would not do that, but you can. And you can choose if you want to check it every 5 minutes, which is, useful for super business critical stuff, or every hour, which is probably fine for a lot of sites. And then there's some other features like you can check, make sure that it's returning the expected content type. If you've got like a REST API, you'd expect that to be like JSON. And if it's not, that means something's wrong. You can check the response body, like make sure that it actually says like, hello, welcome landing page thing somewhere in the response. And if that doesn't show up, that means that maybe something isn't populating when it should. But we don't really need to do that in this case. Now, the one thing is that you only get to choose one location for each monitor. So let's do US Oregon. And you can add notes if you want, but you don't have to. But I'm going to add this uptime monitor, and I'm going to check now. And hey, my site's up.
It went.
And it'll show me I don't have any recorded incidents. That's pretty good. 100% uptime over the last 10 seconds. But yeah, it does all the things you'd expect an uptime monitor to do for free, and I think the UI is pretty cool. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about this. This is it's free. How cool is that? Sorry.
It is very cool. And this is recently added to Fast or Slow. So if you haven't used Fast or Slow recently, you may have just in the past set up the emails to monitor your site's performance, and there's a number of performance metrics that have been emailed to you over time. But this is a new feature, and you'll need to create an account so that you can manage these uptime monitors. But we're really excited and very grateful to premium customers of Wordfence who are they're making these type of things available that we can give to the community.
And like there are paid uptime monitors that I've used that are not nearly as easy to use as this. So like, yeah.
Now, Kathy, we're talking about Core Web Vitals today. So why does Google care about these? What's the deal here?
Okay. Well, first, we've added Core Web Vitals as another metric that Fast or Slow is monitoring. This is something that Google is going to be adding to their page rank in August. They announced this last year, and so if you're in the web development community, you've probably heard about Core Web Vitals as being a ranking factor coming. It was initially slated to launch in May, but they've kicked that down the road a little bit because probably because we're starting to see some sites just aren't ready for this. Now, Core Web Vitals, what are these? Now, there's been a number of things that have sort of been a ranking factor, whether or not you use SSL, if your site is mobile friendly, making sure that you're not using interstitial pop-ups, making sure that you don't have malware on your site. These have all sort of fed into your page rank and your page experience. Important for your end users, but also very important for your SEO, because as we said previously, Google cares about where they're sending their customers, their search customers, when they are getting results. They care very much about where they are sending people. So as web development has gone along, what have we seen? We've seen JavaScript becoming incredibly important. We've seen responsiveness, responsive design, design that will adhere to whatever browser someone's using, if they're using something on a desktop versus mobile, those types of things. And so the web experience has changed along with how people are using the web. And these Core Web Vitals measure some of these newer experience issues that certain sites have sort of been showing to end users. So these Core Web Vitals are just another ranking factor that Google sort of adding into the mix for ranking factors, like how high up in the search engine result pages your site is going to show. So what are these Core Web Vitals, and what are they measuring? So basically, these were introduced last year, and they are going to be measuring your site's speed, your site's responsiveness, and your site's stability. So these are the things that Google is going to be looking at, and they have a number of metrics, these Core Web Vitals, and that vital word in there is kind of hinting at you at how important Google is seeing this as being, are measured by a number of these factors. So first, let's look at speed. Ram, how is speed measured with these Core Web Vitals?
First I want to address Rick Hochman's question about SMS notifications for uptime monitoring, and the answer is we don't have that yet. However, there is a trick. Most mobile providers will also issue an email address that's basically like your phone number at txt.att.com if you're using AT&T, and you can set that as your email address, and all of a sudden you have SMS notifications. There's other ways to port emails to SMS notifications, but we just haven't built it in as a feature yet. So anyways, on to website speed measurements. So the big thing that's new to Core Web Vitals, and Core Web Vitals does incorporate a lot of previous metrics, but the big new thing is something called largest contentful paint. Now that measures the perceived load speed for a site visitor within the viewport. That is to say, specifically within the browser window. So if you can scroll down 10 pages worth of stuff, it doesn't care about the other 9 pages. It just cares about what's at the top of the page. Basically, it marks the point in time when the page's main content has loaded. If you're looking at a blog post, it's the point where all the text has loaded, and maybe the hero image. It's different from other page speed measurements because most other page speed metrics basically track stuff that the browser itself is seeing, like time to first byte or first contentful paint. But a lot of the times those don't matter to the visitors. The visitor doesn't care if the browser has begun rendering something. The visitor cares if they can see something useful on the page. So that's what largest contentful paint really is. And there's, the same things that impact other metrics like time to first byte and first contentful paint also impact largest contentful paint. So, things like slow server response times, render blocking JavaScript and CSS, slow resource loading times, client-side rendering, all of those can impact largest contentful paint. And the thing is, they can impact largest contentful paint, especially things like client-side rendering and slow resource loading. Those impact it way more than they would like time to first byte or first contentful paint. So you want every page on your site, ideally, to hit this metric, to have loaded most of the stuff within the viewport within 2.5 seconds. And that can be kind of hard, but there are things you can do. I'm not going to go into a deep dive because that is a full live stream in itself, but I'll just list off some of the biggest and most obvious ones. You can optimize, your images, especially your big images, your hero images. You can compress them. You can do lossless compression. You can use next generation image formats. One big thing is use CDNs, especially for images and, large JavaScript perhaps. And another thing is, because this cares about what's in the viewport, you can defer JavaScript and CSS that's not necessary to rendering the page. Let's say you've got a CAPTCHA for a contact form halfway down the page. People aren't going to be filling out that form until the page is loaded anyways. You can defer loading that CAPTCHA JavaScript. But, again, stuff like just basic server responsiveness is going to help. You can use things like service workers and cookies. You can, set a preload directive for stuff that you really want to load immediately. And you can make sure that, your actual server resources are optimized and sized correctly for your expected traffic. But it's most of the same stuff that, we already kind of knew about. It's just that certain parts of it are even more important, especially things like using CDNs for images and large resources, and making sure that, your JavaScript is not basically slowing down your rendering. So next is responsiveness. Now let Kathy go into that.
Ram, 1 second before we jump into that. Paul has a question about the largest contentful paint. I believe you said 2.5 seconds.
Yes, 1.82 seconds is very good.
Okay, yeah, so that's going to be, if you're just getting over to fast or slow right now, that's going to be the first metric that you see on the left there after you run your performance monitor there. So keep an eye on that one. And there's a modal there to take you over and get some information on that if you're not keeping up with us here.
Yeah. I'm afraid that the new metrics have made the scoring a little bit harsher, but, that'll get better as everyone adapts. But yeah, let's hand it over to Kathy for responsiveness.
Oh, this is my favorite one. So you're sitting there, and you're just loaded up a web page, and you're on your lunch break. You're visiting at a site, and oh, well, they have a free offer, and you want to get a coupon code, but you have to put in your email address, and you start trying to tap on that form, and nothing is happening. That is poor responsiveness on that particular web page, and that is not a positive experience for your customer, your end user, your site visitor, that target market that you're after. So Google measures responsiveness in a number of ways. Now, they measure pure things in the lab. So they have something called first input delay, and that is the amount of time while a site is loading that it feels unresponsive. So, trying to get a form to be responsive to the end user clicking on something, when a user's first trying to interact with something on your page and it's not responding, they would call that an input delay. But that's really difficult to measure that in the lab because there's so many other things that come into play. So they have an established metric that they call total blocking time in order to measure that first input delay. So the main thread that's happening in a browser is the thread, and this is all coming from JavaScript. A few years ago at WordCamp US, Matt Mullenweg at the State of the Word stated that he wanted WordPress developers to learn JavaScript deeply, sort of as this preemptive alert that JavaScript was going to become incredibly important to WordPress. And if you look around on the web, a lot of the interactivity, the continuous scrolling, things like that, it's all running with JavaScript. JavaScript is running a lot of what is happening on the web. HTML is obviously important for what is being shown to you, but the reactiveness is happening with JavaScript. So if you have a lot of JavaScript libraries on your website, that can cause some of those input delays, and that main thread of what's happening in the browser can get interrupted when a long task is running for more than 50 milliseconds, and you can't interrupt that. So if a user attempts to interrupt it, there's this delay that happens, and they have to wait for that activity to finish before they can respond. And that noticeable delay can affect user experience and makes your site appear to be sluggish or unresponsive. So if that main thread is blocked and the page is unable to respond, anything beyond 50 milliseconds is considered individual blocking time. And then there's a cumulative sum of all of the blocking time that's happening because of JavaScript sort of having too much to do. So time to interactive is another metric, and that's related to page interactivity as well, just a different perspective. So what is a good score? Sites should attempt to have a total blocking time of less than 300 milliseconds, and this is cumulative. So if you have a lot of JavaScript on your site or large libraries, let's say you installed a library because it's got a feature that you need to have for particular interactivity, but you only need like 10% of that library, it'd probably be recommended to find some other way to provide that interactivity that doesn't require the entire library to be loaded. So what you're going to want to do with your sites is to focus on improving your overall JavaScript performance by reducing the unnecessary JavaScript, getting rid of tracking or reducing the amount of third-party tracking that's happening on your site, replacing those larger JavaScript libraries with smaller alternatives, and just kind of look at your JavaScript and how you are using it so that users have a positive responsive experience when they are interacting with a page on your site.
Now we're talking about the core web vitals here. We covered speed and responsiveness. Kathy, now these changes are going to be taking effect in August, right? So if your site isn't measuring well here, not only are you going to lose ranking potentially, but if it's taking a while for these to load and your customers or visitors or viewers can't interact with the page, you're losing out both ways there. So now's the time to start monitoring.
all of these things are not necessarily, I mean, you're not going to want to like, okay, I'm going to improve all my core web vitals so that I can improve my search engine rank. The obvious goal is to improve the experience of all of your customers. And by doing that holistically on your site and not trying to like just game rank, you're going to create, rank will be sort of a side effect of improving the experience for your customers. Improve the experience for your customers, and you're going to see things other than SEO rank. You're going to see improvement in conversions, improvement in your brand. There's going to be tons of marketing-based types of results as well as SEO results.
It's like the saddle pad thing. Like it doesn't like I'm not. It's if you let's say that you somehow manage to cheat your way to the top of the Google search engine rankings, but your website experience is terrible. People are still going to go to that second ranked site if they aren't having a good experience on your site.
Exactly.
So.
Yep. Undoubtedly, yeah. I don't consider myself too impatient, but if something's taking more than a second or two to load, or a 404, I'm immediately going to the next one down in Google. Now, Kathy just covered responsiveness, which is her favorite. RAM stability.
Speaking of things that will make me leave a site and not come back, so I don't know if any of you have ever had this experience, but maybe you'll like be scrolling your Google News feed first thing in the morning. You'll say, hey, that's an interesting article. You'll check it out and you'll be scrolling through, and all of a sudden a giant ad will just pop up and shove all the other content out of the way. And while you're trying to scroll, you will click that ad for something that you have never wanted in your life. And now Google thinks that you're really into like, I don't know, like collectible figurines. And yeah, because you clicked on that ad. So anyways, and then you go back and it's like, yeah, I don't really want to read that article anymore. So that's basically cumulative layout shift. That measures the perceived visual stability of a website page as it is loading. So when a page is loading, I kind of mentioned this, but certain elements can unexpectedly shift. And this creates what is known as a poor user experience, also known as me leaving your site and never coming back, by disrupting a user's ability to consume content, by making clickable content move unpredictably, or it might be a dark design pattern intentionally designed to get you to click that ad, in which case I really am never coming back, or even just covering up content in the middle of the page. Also, if that ad is there and you don't click on it, but now it's covering what you want to read and you can't hit the close button, that's also bad. So this layout shifting is really bad on mobile devices, and it definitely impacts the mobile score. Again, Fast or Slow doesn't specifically measure mobile scores, but it uses the same metrics for mobile and for desktop. It's just the thresholds of how it's scored vary between the two. And it can create frustration and mistrust. So layout shifts are measured anytime an element visible in the viewport, and again, that's the browser window, the visible part of the page, changes its position between two frames. When I say frames, I believe that Google basically takes a video of how sites load. But yeah, these are considered unstable elements. So cumulative layout shift measures the sum total of all the individual layout shift scores for every unexpected layout shift that happens while the page is loading. So a bad score can be one of those things that just kind of sticks with a website. So it's a pretty important metric to keep an eye on. A good cumulative layout shift score is 0.1 or less. Don't ask me what the units are because I'm not actually sure. But the good news is that there are ways to improve cumulative layout shift scores. And so one of the big things you can do is allocate space for elements on the page ahead of time. And I mean, part of this is sort of a result of responsive design, but we can't blame it entirely. But yeah, one of the things you can do is if you're using CSS for images, start using aspect ratios. That helps a lot. If you're not using CSS, or even if you are, you can also, if you're only expecting, one device type, you can specify specific image dimensions for images and video content. And again, aspect ratio is good. You can use source sets to allow the browser to select like an appropriately sized image for the device that is viewing the page. If you are using advertisements or embeds or iframes, you really reserve the spots for those elements before loading the content, so that you don't shove everything else out of the way and make me click on them by accident. And now I keep on getting ads for mini figurines. Anyways, alternatively, you could also move ads, embeds, and iframes further down the page outside of the viewport. You could basically like lazy load them or defer loading them. And that will help too, because if it's not in the initial viewport, it doesn't matter for, page experience, initial page experience. We also very strongly recommend inserting new content like ad banners or, any kind of banners or forms above existing content, because that'll shove stuff out of the way as well. And font loading. So here's the thing. Web font loading is kind of challenging. You can preload web fonts, but you can also specify fallback web fonts, which is a really cool trick that helps with that a lot. Basically, if the visitor's browser doesn't have the font you want, you can say, hey, I bet you have this basic font installed. Just use that instead. And that helps a lot as well. Cumulative layout shift is kind of my thing. And the cool thing is you can actually set up alerts for when any of these scores change on your site. You can actually set up alerts for when these scores change on one of a number of different pages. So I'm going to screen share that. Am I screen sharing the right? Yes, I am. Cool. So I'm back at the monitoring dashboard, and I think I would like to create a performance monitor.
It looks like your site is still up, which is also a good sign.
It is good, but I've only got it monitoring every hour, so, So here, let's do a monitor for just the home page. I could do the overall score, but I'm actually more interested in seeing if my cumulative layout shift changes over time. So I'm going to add that. And I would like to know if it gets more than 10% worse. But you know what? I'm also going to check the largest contentful paint score, and I'm going to add a monitor for that. And I'd like to know if it goes more than 5% in any direction. And going to add monitoring for that.
And it's normal to see some changes from when you monitor your performance here, or whenever you check maybe every day or so. You're going to see some changes there.
Yeah, you mentioned baselining, and you do maybe initially want to check every day when you are first starting out. Once you have a better idea of how your site goes, you can set it up to monitor, regularly, but you might not need to manually check it every day. You can just set up the alerts so that, if one of these thresholds gets, met or exceeded, or, your score drops more than a certain amount in any direction, you'll basically be alerted. And that's really the cool thing about performance monitoring, is that it just lets you know not just if your site is up, but also if your site is experiencing issues that it might not have had in the past. And again, if your site gets infected, one sign of it might be that, your total blocking time increases a lot because all of a sudden there's a malicious JavaScript on there. So...
Or it gets taken down by a hacker, and then that uptime monitor becomes incredibly important and allows you to get your incident response going quickly.
Yeah, I mean, of course, if you have a if you have a business, you probably should be checking your site every day, at least once a day. But even so, maybe you've just got a landing page or a squeeze page or something, in which case, you're more interested in checking your email than your website itself. But,
One of the things that I really like about how this is set up, a lot of us are looking at, Core Web Vitals becoming a ranking factor in August, and we're starting, or we have been, trying to improve our scores. This allows you to kind of set some thresholds and then just go to work trying to improve all of the things, doing the best practices holistically to improve scores across the board on your site, or target a specific page. If there's a landing page, then you're really trying to improve conversion on that, because all of these types of things improve the performance of the user experience that your customers are having. And then Fast or Slow kind of monitors it for you, and it's like, boom, you hit the threshold, or boom, you did something. What did you do? You've ruined everything. And it will alert you to let you know that the changes that you're making are either improving things drastically or causing problems, and you can address it then. You don't have to constantly okay, change, monitor, go hit the site with some measurements. It will just be there in the background running to let you know what you're doing is working or not.
Yeah, and again, that cumulative layout shift, it is showing a triangle because it's very small and it's basically a really good score, but it's still not 0. So there's still room for improvement on that. It is one of those things where Google would really prefer it to be 0, even if they have a threshold of 0.1 as good. So.
Yeah, I saw a number of people had mentioned that there, and of course, as Rem mentioned initially, Google wants to see that as low as possible at 0 there.
And I did want to mention also that we are using Lighthouse for fast or slow. So we are using the same technology that Google uses to measure these things. Our scoring thresholds may not be exactly the same, but that's when I'm saying scoring thresholds, I mean the 0 to 100 mood rings of you scored like a 90. But the actual metrics, the like 0.002, the like 1.5 seconds, those are the same metrics using the same tool that Google uses. So I would consider fast or slow to be a pretty reliable way of measuring this stuff.
Now, we mentioned there Google wanting to see a 0. We see some pretty low scores in our comments from our viewers. Kathy, can it really ever be perfect, though?
Well, it's kind of it's on a continuum, isn't it? Because you want to have a visually robust experience for your end users. You want to have your end users have a positive brand experience, so there's a lot of visual elements on your site. So where do you have to throw everything into the balance? Kind of like with security, you can't, the most secure system is, buried in concrete under 6 feet of dirt, right? That's the most secure, but it's not usable. So where is the most enticing sales and marketing happening on your site that really engages a user and draws them into your brand experience, but also has those page speed, core web vital metrics, and stable performance on a page, making sure that those are addressed as well. Where is it good enough? And it's going to be different for every single page, right? Your homepage, you may want, people who are coming to your homepage to have an exemplary experience. What does all of that mean? Does that mean no images whatsoever and everything's, set in stone on your site and it's, not incredibly responsive? You have to kind of set those metrics of and those thresholds for what is important for your brand for each individual pages. Now, you're going to have to look at what pages you're going to want to monitor. Ram was setting it up for his homepage. Maybe he has a landing page on his site where he's trying to capture email addresses and has sort of like a call to action that's happening there. Maybe he wants that to rank really well because he's driving traffic from various sources into that experience. So the landing page would be important to measure for all of these metrics as well. So you'd want to set up some performance monitoring there. You'd like to set out maybe on your product pages. Like let's take a look at Amazon. If you're searching for a new pair of shoes and you go to Google and look for a new pair of shoes, Amazon's usually right up there in terms of their rank, and so obviously for Amazon, ranking on their product specific pages is incredibly important. So they're probably going to want to look at Core Web Vitals for product pages incredibly closely and making sure that those are measuring well. Maybe the contact page they don't care so much about. Maybe the About Us page isn't that important either because you're not really driving a conversion there. You're not really driving SEO rank for the About Us. You're looking more at product pages and service pages and those types of things. So you kind of have to measure what's important to your customers, what's important to your end users, and what's important to your business and to the targets that your team, your marketing team has set. So that's where you're going to want to set up those measurements. And the good thing is when you're improving performance for product pages or any kind of conversion pages, you're looking at the overall wrapper of your site. The headers are going to be tight, the footers are going to be tight, so it's going to kind of lift up the performance of all of your pages. So your About page is going to kind of come along for the ride, but that's probably not something that you want to target to make sure, oh wow, About Us has got a 99 score, that's great. Doesn't really matter to the bottom line of your business. So target the things that are most important to your business and improve those scores as best as possible. And we're hoping that Fast or Slow, this free tool, will give you all of the tools that you need and all the measurements that you need, and make it a lot easier for you to do in the long run.
Speaking
Yes.
of, Jill has a question. If they want to monitor multiple sites, do they need to set up an account for each site?
Nope, you can
for
monitor
that?
multiple sites from a single account.
Yeah.
Yeah, depending, I mean, you can even monitor the same sites from multiple accounts. So if you want to have, alerts going to, multiple people, you might have to set up a different account for each person. But
And RJ mentioned and asked, how does country blocking affect a site that is not considered international?
well, realistically, you're probably not going to get you're not going to get the response you expect from country blocking. However, again, with the uptime monitoring, you notice how we give you the option to check which status code you're expecting. You could possibly use that to check whether or not your site is successfully country blocking requests.
Good point.
So
Yeah, we
you want to
had
make sure it's
some-
getting a 403, for instance.
Questions further back that I'm looking. I do know one thing that we have, and that is our swag winners here, which I believe we have a graphic for. Congrats to our 5 who correctly guessed or knew, I believe, 18 locations, right, Ram, for the locations that Fast or Slow is measuring performance from.
Yep. Up
We
to
got,
18 locations, depending on how the particular data center in that region happens to be doing.
Eric, Mark, Joseph, Dishantha, and Mark. Congrats to you 5 for being the first to answer correctly there. I suspect you've had some experience with Fast or Slow prior to this. So if not, and you're just getting going with it, now is the time. As we mentioned, a couple months, some changes coming with Google there. Go ahead, Ram.
Oh, and I will say that, I'll bring up the idea of integrating this into Central. I don't know if we've considered that yet, but I'll bring it up. Seems like it might be pretty neat if we were to do something like that. So,
Yeah, we always appreciate the feedback and everybody stopping by. I believe we have a few other graphics. And to our swag winners, if you care to send in pictures when you get your swag, we always like showing the pictures on air.
oh,
So cute.
that is a very good kitty.
Tough to beat these ones, though, I think.
It is.
And I believe that was Malcolm who sent those in last week. So we appreciate that a lot. Kathy, Ram, we talked about quite a lot here. And as you mentioned a few times, we could have went for ages with this discussion. Just covering Fast or Slow alone, I mean, you can go forever. Go ahead,
There's
Ram.
one other thing I want to mention, and I think this will address a lot of just sort of a general anxiety about site performance and a measurement. But when you're doing the kind of measurement that Google does on a sort of massive scale involving large amounts of data, you are worried more about accuracy than precision. It's like measuring your heart rate when you're running. You don't need to know if between 1 second to another it's 157 beats a minute versus 158. It's more, is it in the 150 to 160 range? And that's the thing. Precision will vary with any kind of measuring tool that has a lot of weird factors, such as, networks and thousands of miles between stuff. So the actual exact precise measurements are going to be, changed by a decimal point or two between measurements. That's just how measuring works. But what this does let you do is measure trends. And once you get an idea of baseline, you get an idea of what kind of variance you see. So if you say like up and down 5% is normal, then that's what you can use. If it goes to like 10%,
Right.
then you have a problem. So
Good point. Very good
Don't
point.
get lost in the minutia of, oh, it's up by 0.001% from yesterday. That doesn't matter. That's probably a rounding error, because that's how measuring tools work. Worry about trends, worry about percentage compared to baseline. And that will make your life so much less stressful than trying to min-max it.
Yeah, and we covered a good bit here, but there is still a lot of good information, a lot of good documentation right on the Fast or Slow site. So if any of these metrics confused you, and if you're not sure, this is your first time that you got a performance report on your site, head over and click on those and check them out, because there's a
Go
lot
Ludwig.
of information.
That's actually a pretty good
96,
score with the
yeah.
with the new metrics. Yeah, wow.
Might be the highest we've seen here. I do see Malcolm is here. Thanks for dropping by. Thanks again for the pictures. Mark, we appreciate you stopping by. Kristen, Rick, I saw Susan earlier. RJ, Jill, thanks everybody again for stopping by. We appreciate you here each week learning with us and hanging out with us. It's always fun. Anything else on these metrics or fast or slow right now? We have a few other things to talk about here, but Kathy, Ram, I think we covered the gist of it, huh?
Yeah, and I mean, some of those metrics have been part of Fast or Slow for a while. And we do have a previous live stream where we go over the metrics that have been part of Fast or Slow for a while. So check that out if you want to learn more about what the other numbers mean and how you can improve those. Yeah.
And we just gave a very high level view of what Core Web Vitals is all about. It's important, it's coming, but you're going to have to, if you're having issues, if you go and you measure on Fast or Slow and you're seeing, my site is not measuring nearly where I need it to be in order to hit my targets. There are videos out on YouTube. There's a lot of documentation on Google site, on the Lighthouse site, that have a number of different things that you can try to start improving some of these metrics for your site. So Google has been doing a lot of work in order to help people kind of up their game so that they can roll this out. So watch for it coming in August. We'll probably post something. If you're not following the Fast or Slow Twitter account, you'll want to follow that. When we see Core Web Vitals starting to roll out into ranking, we'll probably have some notes on the Fast or Slow site as well as on the Twitter account.
Another thing to check out, if you missed it, last week we had a great podcast. That was Ram and Kathy. There was some talk about Jetpack and the reuse of passwords. Also, the password dump 8.4 billion passwords, right? That was...
with a footnote that a lot of them are just dictionary words, but it doesn't matter having that many words, that many of which are actually used passwords in one place. It just kind of lowers the friction for performing brute force dictionary and credential stuffing attacks to the point where it seems like more people are trying it.
And I believe there was a Chrome 0-day bug as well, which we...
Again, and
We
a
always like
Safari
that.
0 day. So,
Yeah.
it's not just Chrome, it's Safari too.
Yeah,
Hate to
it's your
single out
update
Chrome.
Chrome reminder again.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, if you want to catch that, Kathy, that's typically Friday, and that's about a 10 to 20 minute format for the podcast. So you
Yeah.
can catch Ram and Kathy here if you've enjoyed this. They are excellent on the podcast. I get to listen to it every week, and it's really nice seeing them on. So if you haven't checked that out yet, you can get it on Spotify. It's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, just about everywhere, right?
SoundCloud.
SoundCloud. Don't want to forget SoundCloud.
Check my SoundCloud, everyone.
Last thing, go head over to the footer of wordfence.com. We have the mailing list there. You can also see the podcast mailing list if you're interested now and you want to be informed next week whenever we get that out, or later this week on Friday. Go ahead, put your email in there. More importantly, get onto the mailing list because you'll be the first to hear about what the threat intel team here, including Ram and Chloe, are finding. You can hear that you're protected there if you're a premium user, or maybe you need to get something updated as well along the way. Rick says to keep growing the beard. Ram, I think
Well, thank
you're
you.
on it, right?
I'm using this marula oil stuff. I don't know. It seems to be making it extra fluffy, so...
I see Adam mentions he checks Chrome updates almost hourly. I think that's the way to go now, especially if you
Yeah.
if you listen to the podcast.
And
You're always
it'll
going to
let
be
you
aware.
know. There's a little update button in the upper right, so like you don't have to go to help about anymore. It'll just tell you, hey, update now, which is super cool.
All right, Ram, Kathy, anything to add before we cut out here? We will be back next week, of course, but in the meantime, yeah, we appreciate everybody stopping by. We always love seeing you. Thanks, Mark, for the feedback. You can always write in feedback at wordfence.com, and we'll take a look at your message and get back to you. We really appreciate your time here. Until next week, We wish you a great rest of the week, and we'll see you soon here on WordFence Live. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for
Bye-bye.
watching.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Wordfence. We have better hackers.